That early morning felt colder than usual. Sofia, sitting in the chair next to the small hospital bed, held Miguel's hand tightly, as if that connection could shield them from a harsh reality. In front of them, lying in a fragile bed surrounded by machines that seemed to steal any sense of peace, slept Rafael, their 2-year-old son, small and fragile beneath the white sheet covering his weakened body. It all started with a persistent fever, which doctors initially attributed to a common infection. Sofia didn't want to seem paranoid, but something inside her felt uneasy. In just a few months, Rafael's symptoms escalated from a simple fever to extreme fatigue, unexplained bruises, and a gaze that, despite his young age, seemed weighed down by pain. The news came devastatingly fast. Rafael had leukemia, an aggressive and rare form of childhood cancer. How are we going to do this, Miguel? Sofia whispered, looking at her husband, who was trying to keep his composure, though his red eyes betrayed him. Miguel shook his head. A strong man by nature, he now found himself unsure of what to do. The words cancer seemed so surreal, so distant from anything they had ever imagined facing. But there they were, sitting in that sterile, cold room, facing their worst nightmare. The first stage of treatment was an aggressive chemotherapy, one that promised as much to help as it threatened to further weaken Rafael's already frail body. However, there was a glimmer of hope, a promising new drug, though not available in Brazil and incredibly expensive. Miguel and Sofia knew that every second was precious, and that without this drug, Rafael's chances would be slim. Sofia will manage. Even if I have to move mountains, we'll get that medicine, Miguel said, gripping his wife's hand with as much firmness as he could muster, though he was trembling inside. But as the weeks passed, each treatment, each dose of medication seemed to only exhaust Rafael more. Sofia woke up every early morning to the eerie quiet of the hospital, hearing only the sounds of the machines and the faint breaths of other children nearby. Seeing her son like this was breaking her. One night, while Miguel slept in an improvised chair beside her, she began searching online for information on alternative treatments, international solutions, anything that might help her son. Among forums and desperate accounts from other mothers, she found information about a lawyer who had helped families secure expensive medications through legal channels. It was a difficult path, but Sofia didn't care. She would face any bureaucracy, any obstacle, anyone standing between her and her son's health. The next morning, Sofia could barely wait to talk to Miguel. As the first light of dawn entered through the window, she woke him with a new hope in her eyes. Miguel, we're going to go to court. There's a lawyer who can help us get the medicine. This might be our only chance. Miguel, his face worn with exhaustion, looked at Sofia and, for a moment, felt the weight of the decision they were about to make. He knew Sofia wouldn't stop until she had tried every possible option. We'll do it, Sofia. For Rafael, we'll go to the end. And so, as the days turned into weeks, they began a fight not just against the illness, but against a system that seemed inaccessible and cold. Each signed paper, each meeting with a lawyer, was a step they took into the unknown. Sofia and Miguel knew the battle would be long, but they held on to something that not even the illness could extinguish, the hope of saving their son. The following weeks turned into a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, hearings, and paperwork. Sofia and Miguel faced the bureaucracy of the legal system with an almost superhuman courage. Both knew time was precious. Each day lost waiting for a decision meant more suffering for Rafael, who now alternated between deep sleeps and painful awakenings filled with tears and fear. One afternoon, while Sofia was waiting in a small hallway of the courthouse, she was overtaken by a mixture of emotions she couldn't even describe. On one side, there was the hope of getting Rafael's treatment. On the other, the fear that there might not be enough time. The family's lawyer, Dr. Mauricio, approached with firm steps, though his expression was more serious than Sofia had hoped to see. Sofia, we have an initial response on the injunction, he said carefully as she held her breath. We've received temporary authorization to import the medication, but the cost will be extremely high. We'll need to prove the family can't afford the expenses, as well as justify that the drug is vital for Rafael. Sofia looked at him, processing each word. They were so close, yet still so far away. Her heart tightened at the thought of the amount needed and the possibility that the treatment might not be feasible. As she left the courthouse, Sofia found Miguel waiting outside. He held a bouquet of wildflowers, already a bit wilted, that he'd found along the way. Despite everything, he still found ways to bring a smile to his wife's face. "So, any news?" he asked, offering her the flowers with a hopeful yet anxious look. Sofia told him what the lawyer had explained, and they looked at each other, feeling the weight of the decision they had to make. The emotional and physical struggle wasn't enough. Now there was the financial challenge. Rafael needed the medication, and they would have to race against time to prove they couldn't afford it. "Sofia, I know this is hard, but we're going to make it. I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way to cover these costs," Miguel said with a conviction that surprised even himself. That night, in the hospital, Sofia and Miguel stayed by their son's side, listening to the constant, monotonous sound of the machines monitoring each beat of his fragile little heart. While Miguel slept in a chair beside the bed, Sofia felt Rafael's empty gaze fixed on her. It seemed as though he was trying to understand what was happening around him, why he felt so much pain, and why his parents were always by his side, looking tired and worried. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice weak and frail. Sofia moved closer, gently stroking his hair, thinned from the chemotherapy. "I'm here, my love. Mommy is right here," she replied, trying to stay calm as a single tear slipped down her cheek. "Why am I here? I want to go home," he murmured, looking at her with an innocence that broke her heart. Sofia closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. How could she explain to such a small child that he was there fighting for his life? How could she respond to such a simple request that she couldn't fulfill? The next morning, Miguel made a decision. Gathering his strength and courage, he picked up the phone and called a TV program that helped families in desperate situations. He didn't like the idea of exposing their lives, but he knew that, at that moment, every resource was worth it. Days later, they received a response from the program. They wanted to tell Rafael's story. Miguel and Sofia knew public exposure would bring criticism, but it would also open doors. Soon, the entire country was watching the struggle of that family against a system that seemed so inhumane and against a devastating illness. Donations began to pour in, some large, some small, but all filled with hope and love. Rafael's parents took turns with the phone calls, tracking the donations and reading messages of support. However, even with all the generosity of people, the amount was still far from what they needed. That same week, the hospital informed them that the results from Rafael's latest test were not good. The doctors explained that he would only have a few months left if he didn't start the specific treatment as soon as possible. The news hit them like a death sentence. Sofia held the phone with trembling hands, listening to the doctor explain every detail, but the words felt distant, as if someone else were hearing them. She looked at Rafael, who was playing with a little teddy bear on the bed, oblivious to the suffering around him. As soon as she hung up, Miguel, who had been listening to the conversation, came over and, without saying a word, hugged Sofia tightly, as if that gesture could hold together the world that was falling apart around them. "Miguel, he can't wait. We need that medicine now, more than ever," she whispered, her voice breaking. Miguel knew they couldn't lose hope. He believed, with all his soul, that they would find a way. "Then let's keep going, Sofia. We'll go all the way." The next morning, Miguel made a radical decision. He was willing to sell everything they had to cover Rafael's treatment costs. The house they lived in, the car, the furniture, everything they'd built together over the years now seemed irrelevant. All that mattered was giving their son a chance. When Sofia heard of her husband's decision, she hesitated for a moment. The house was more than just a structure. It was the home where they'd dreamed of the future, where they'd planned Rafael's arrival, and where they'd spent his first months. But at the same time, she knew Rafael's life was worth any sacrifice. "Miguel, selling our house, will that be enough?" Sofia asked softly, though she already knew the answer. "I don't know, Sofia. "But I won't sit here and watch our son suffer without fighting with everything we have," he replied, his eyes serious and determined. "If our house isn't enough, I'll find another way, even if I have to beg door to door." They sold the car, listed the furniture for sale, and transferred everything they could to the account designated for Rafael's treatment. But even with their public support, a lifetime of savings, and everything they'd managed to raise, they were still far from covering the total cost of the imported medication and the next phases of treatment. Desperate and exhausted, Sofia and Miguel barely slept. Rafael's hospital routine was relentless, and now he was starting to lose weight and hair at a pace that terrified his parents. Watching their son wither away before their eyes was a pain so deep it felt like it destroyed something within them. One night, as Sofia and Miguel talked in the small hospital cafeteria, Dr. Fabio, Rafael's oncologist, approached. He looked tired but gentle, and his constant presence was one of the few comforts they found in that place. "Sofia, Miguel, I've seen your struggle, and I know it hasn't been easy. I also know about the financial difficulties and bureaucracy. I need to be honest. Even if you get the medication, the fight will be long. This is only the beginning of a path full of uncertainties." Sofia looked at the doctor, trying to absorb his words. She took a deep breath, trying to find strength amidst the storm. "Dr. Fabio, we're not giving up. We know the road is long, but if there's even the slightest chance to save Rafael, we'll go all the way," she replied firmly. The doctor nodded, impressed by the couple's resilience. He knew that many parents, hearing such an uncertain prognosis, would have given up, but Sofia and Miguel seemed ready to face the world. "In that case, there is a possibility," he continued. "We have a partnership with a university in the United States that's conducting research on experimental therapies. This type of treatment is still in its early stages, but in some cases, it has shown promising results. The issue is that you need to take Rafael there, and the cost is high." The doctor's suggestion caught them by surprise. Experimental treatments? Transporting Rafael to another country with no guaranteed results? Miguel and Sofia looked at each other in silence, until Miguel took a deep breath, as if about to leap off a cliff. "Dr. Fabio, we're willing to try anything. No matter where we have to go, if there's a chance to save our son, we'll do it," said Miguel, his voice resolute. In the following days, they began the preparations to take Rafael abroad. Sofia spent hours researching and making calls, trying to understand the details of the treatment and organize the logistics of the trip. But in the midst of this process, a new barrier emerged. Getting authorization to fly Rafael in his fragile state was complicated, and the requirements for a medical support flight drove the cost even higher. The donations from the campaign and the sale of their possessions had already been exhausted, and despair began to grow again. They were trapped, watching the chance for treatment slip away due to the costs and lack of financial support. In a moment of utter desperation, Sofia had a bold idea. "Miguel, we need to go further with this exposure. We need a last resort. I'm going to write an open letter, tell our whole story, and ask people directly for help," she announced, her eyes shining with determination. Miguel hesitated. He knew this would mean exposing their lives even more, allowing strangers to see their families suffering. But when he saw the determined look in Sofia's eyes, he understood that it was necessary. Sofia stayed up all night, writing and rewriting her words, trying to convey the urgency and despair of their situation. The next morning, with friends' support, the letter was circulating on social media and in local newspapers. The headline was powerful: "A right to live," a mother's plea for her son with cancer. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, messages of support and donations began pouring in. People across the country were moved by Sofia's honest and heartbreaking story. However, there was still a long way to go, and they knew time was against them. That night, exhausted and shaken, Miguel and Sofia returned to the hospital. Rafael was asleep, with a faint smile that seemed to defy the seriousness of his condition. Miguel sat beside the bed and held his son's hand, while Sofia watched moved. "Rafael, my little one," he whispered. "We're doing everything we can for you. I promise I'll fight until the last second to see you well." Hearing those words, Sofia felt something break inside her. She knew that despite all their efforts, there was still no guarantee they'd succeed. But as Miguel held Rafael's tiny hand in his, she realized they'd made the most important promise of their lives, to fight for him, to the very end. The following weeks became a frantic race. Sofia's open letter gained national attention, and the media began following the family's battle. Rafael's case touched thousands of people who, moved by the couple's fight, sent messages of support and, in some cases, small donations that, when combined, helped a little more in reaching the goal. But, despite so much generosity, the amount needed was still overwhelming. One morning, on their way to the hospital, Miguel received an unexpected call. It was from a high-ranking official at the Ministry of Health. "Mr. Miguel, I read about your son's situation. It's a very delicate case, and we want to help in any way we can," said the voice on the other end, with a formal tone. "We're aware of the urgency for the experimental treatment in the United States, and despite all the financial difficulties you've been facing, we've managed to approve emergency aid to cover part of the travel expenses." Miguel felt a surge of hope that nearly took his breath away. This was the help they'd been waiting for, a breakthrough in the bureaucratic wall they'd been facing. But amid his emotion, he heard the rest. "However, there's still a problem. The full amount to cover the treatment cannot be provided by the government. You'll need to secure the remaining funds on your own." When he hung up, Miguel shared the news with Sofia, who looked at him with a mix of hope and frustration. It was progress, but the treatment was still far from reach. "We'll find a way, Miguel. We've come so far already. Maybe something else will happen," she said, trying to sound optimistic, though the exhaustion showed on her face. "I know it's hard, but we can't stop now." That night, after another exhausting day at Rafael's side, Miguel and Sofia sat in the hospital cafeteria, where the smell of coffee and disinfectant filled the air. They discussed which remaining belongings they could sell, and whom they might reach out to for the remaining funds. "If we don't get it by the end of the week, we'll be out of options," Miguel said, his voice hoarse. "We only have a few more days until Rafael's documents are due for the flight and treatment." Sofia looked at him, feeling the weight of time and despair. That was when, suddenly, an older man sitting nearby approached. He seemed hesitant but determined, like someone who had gathered the courage to approach after overhearing part of their conversation. "Excuse me, I overheard a bit of your conversation. I don't mean to intrude, but I saw you on TV, and I think I might be able to help in some way," said the man, with a calm voice and a gentle smile. He introduced himself as Luis, a retired businessman who, after losing his son to a similar illness years ago, decided to use his fortune to support other families in desperate situations. Miguel and Sofia exchanged glances, still cautious, but Luis's kind gaze and gentle tone conveyed a rare sincerity. "I can't imagine your suffering," he continued. "I lost my son when he was only 7. Nothing in the world is more devastating. Since then, whenever I see parents facing this battle, I try to help. If you'll allow it, I'd like to contribute whatever's missing for Rafael's trip and treatment." Luis's words felt like a miracle. Sofia and Miguel could hardly believe that, after so much despair, an unexpected help appeared right when they needed it most. With tears in her eyes, Sofia held Luis's hand, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to thank you. We were losing hope," she said, her voice choked. "You don't need to thank me. Rafael is going to win this fight," Luis replied, with a certainty that rekindled hope in Sofia and Miguel's hearts. With Luis's financial support, the expedited help from the Ministry of Health, and Sofia and Miguel's unbreakable determination, the day of their departure finally arrived. Rafael was weak, but he'd received special authorization to fly with a medical team to ensure his safety during the journey. At the airport, a small crowd of relatives, friends, and even strangers gathered to wish the family strength and a safe trip. Many held signs with words of encouragement for Rafael, and the atmosphere was deeply emotional. Seeing so many people moved by their story, Sofia felt strengthened, as though the battle was now shared by many hearts. "Mommy, are we going home?" Rafael asked, confused, as he looked around at the emotional faces. Sofia knelt beside him, gently caressing his pale face. "We're taking a little trip, my love. After this, I promise we'll come back home, and you'll be well," she replied, trying to hide her own worry with a smile. The flight was long and exhausting. Rafael slept most of the time, while Sofia and Miguel tried to take turns with the little rest they could manage. Yet, even amid their exhaustion, there was a palpable sense of hope. For the first time, they felt like they were bringing Rafael to something that could genuinely change his fate. As soon as they landed in the United States, they were greeted by the team from a hospital where the experimental treatment would take place. Dr. Anderson, the oncologist who would oversee the new therapy, waited for them with a calm, welcoming expression that conveyed an understanding of the urgency of Rafael's case. "Miguel, Sofia, I know this is a difficult fight. We'll be here by your side, and we'll do everything we can for Rafael," said the doctor, as Rafael slept in Sofia's arms, still tired from the long journey. Settled in an apartment close to the hospital, they began preparing for the first phase of the treatment. The experimental protocol was complex, and according to Dr. Anderson, it would bring immense challenges. Rafael would have to undergo new tests, adjustments, and an even more exhausting routine than before. In the first days of therapy, Sofia and Miguel watched every detail of the procedure with tight hearts and shallow breaths, as though fearing that one wrong move could make everything fall apart. Then, in the early hours of the third day of treatment, Rafael had a severe reaction. Alarms blared, and doctors rushed into his room. Sofia, desperate, tried to reach her son but was held back by the medical team. "Rafael, Rafael," she screamed, trying to see him as the doors closed, and she was kept outside. Miguel held her by the shoulders, trying to calm her, but he was also in shock. It was as if their entire world was crumbling once again. In that cold corridor, lit by artificial lights, Sofia and Miguel waited, not knowing what was happening, not knowing if they would see Rafael again. Sofia and Miguel were paralyzed. The ICU doors had closed in front of them, and the silence of the hallway felt suffocating as the minutes dragged on like an eternity. Sofia leaned against the cold walls, hugging herself as silent tears streamed down her face. Miguel stood beside her, unmoving, his jaw clenched as though holding back all the pain he felt, trying not to let Sofia fall apart even more. After what seemed like hours, Dr. Anderson emerged, his face exhausted but attempting a reassuring expression. Sofia, Miguel, Rafael had a reaction to the treatment, which can happen with children in such fragile states. He had difficulty breathing and a high fever, but we've managed to stabilize him for now, he explained in a gentle tone that couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. Sofia put her hands over her face, trying to hold back her sobs. Will he be okay?" she asked, barely audible, feeling the weight of uncertainty in every word. Dr. Anderson paused, and Sofia sensed that the silence meant more. "We'll keep monitoring him with extra care. Unfortunately, I can't promise there won't be other complications. This therapy is experimental, and Rafael's body is extremely sensitive. But I assure you, we're doing everything we can," he responded cautiously, his eyes showing empathy but also concern. Miguel nodded, gripping Sofia's hand more tightly. He knew that now, more than ever, he had to stay strong. It was as if every fiber of his being screamed at him to hold it together, even though despair was all he felt inside. That night, they weren't allowed to see Rafael. He would need intensive care and isolation until the medical team was sure he was out of danger. Sofia and Miguel spent the entire night in the hospital corridor, unable to sleep, finding comfort only in each other as they waited for news. Days later, Rafael was finally stable. They were allowed to go in and see him, and Sofia walked slowly to the bed where he lay, pale and even more fragile than before. She held his small hand, stroking it with her thumb, and leaned down to whisper in his ear. "Mommy's here, Rafael. We're all here for you. I promise, my love, you're going to be okay." He slowly opened his eyes, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, and tried to give a tiny smile upon seeing his parents. That faint expression, full of love, sparked a glimmer of hope in Sofia's heart. She realized that, Despite everything, Rafael was stronger than they had imagined. The following week, the treatment routine continued, and Rafael faced each procedure with a surprising courage for someone so young. Sofia and Miguel tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy with him, even in the hospital, to give him a sense of routine. They read books, watched cartoons, sang songs, and told stories about the adventures they would have together once this was over. The hope of seeing their son play outdoors and run freely kept them going. But with each new test and each new phase of the treatment, the results came back with mixed responses, and the medical team remained cautious. Rafael seemed to have good days and others when weakness overtook his body, which worried Sofia more and more. One of those days, while Sofia was talking with Dr. Anderson in the hallway, he invited her and Miguel to his office for a conversation. "Sofia, Miguel, as you know, we're doing everything we can with the experimental treatment, but there's something we need to discuss," he said, pausing as though carefully choosing his words. Miguel exchanged a worried glance with Sofia, sensing that something important was coming. "What is it, doctor?" Miguel asked, holding his breath. Dr. Anderson took a deep breath. "We know Rafael is responding to the treatment to some extent, but we're reaching a limit. The experimental protocol we've been following has proven helpful in some ways, but he still needs a complementary medication that is extremely difficult to obtain. It's a new drug, still in the final stages of approval and only available for extreme cases. I can't guarantee it, but there's a chance that this medication could help him significantly." The news hit Sofia and Miguel like a blow. Once again, fate seemed to place a new barrier, a new challenge before them. "But how can we get it? What do we need to do?" Sofia asked, desperation evident in her voice. "I'll need authorization from the research sponsors. Besides that, the cost is extremely high, even higher than the experimental treatment we've already started. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but Rafael is facing an enormous battle, and we need every tool we can get," Dr. Anderson said, holding his gaze on Rafael's parents, aware of the weight of his words. Sofia and Miguel sat side by side, trying to process the new information. They had given everything they had and more, had touched the hearts of thousands through their campaign, and now yet another barrier seemed insurmountable. As they left the doctor's office, Miguel held Sofia close as she couldn't hold back her tears. She felt as if the world was crumbling again. In a sudden impulse, Miguel took her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes, determined. "Sofia, we've come too far to give up now. No matter what, we'll find a way to get that medication. If I have to, I'll work day and night. I'll do whatever it takes." He knew his words were a fragile comfort, but he also believed they needed that resolve, even if just to keep breathing and waking up every day. Sofia nodded, wiping her face and composing herself. She knew Miguel was as exhausted as she was, but she also knew that hope, as painful as it was still their greatest weapon. In the days that followed, they began mobilizing their social networks again. Sofia wrote new letters of appeal, and Miguel reached out to organizations that might have connections to those overseeing the experimental medication. Rafael's story was gaining momentum again, and, once more, public support began to grow. Then, amid their struggle, they received an unexpected call. A representative from the pharmaceutical company producing the medication had heard about Rafael's case. He sounded compassionate, and upon learning of the financial challenges the family faced, he offered to include Rafael in a subsidized patient program. This would cover part of the medication's cost, but a significant amount was still needed. Sofia and Miguel felt relief, but also anxiety. They were closer than ever to securing the medication, yet they still needed more financial support to cover the remaining costs. The fight was intensifying, and they knew they were racing against time and the exhaustion that threatened to overtake them. And so, while they awaited a final response from the company, Sofia and Miguel remained by Rafael's side, more aware than ever that, on this journey, it was their unwavering love for him that enabled them to face the impossible. The following days were marked by constant tension. Every small sign, every change in Rafael's condition, was watched closely. Sofia and Miguel stayed by his side day and night, praying silently that the experimental medication would bring some improvement. On the 5th day after the first dose, Dr. Anderson gathered the couple for a conversation in the meeting room. He looked cautious, but there was something in his expression that indicated a hint of optimism. "Sofia, Miguel," he began, sitting down in front of them. "The initial tests have shown some promising signs. It's still early to say anything definitive, but Rafael's body appears to be responding positively to the treatment." The news, though preliminary, was a breath of hope for the couple, something they had been waiting for since the beginning of this long battle. "So, he has a real chance?" Miguel asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Dr. Anderson nodded, though cautiously. "There's a chance, yes. That's what I can say with honesty. But we still need to monitor him closely. His response could change at any time, and we need to be ready to act quickly if there are any complications." Sofia looked at the doctor with gratitude and anxiety. After so long living on the edge of despair, that small advance felt like a blessing. The following days brought even more hope. Rafael began to show visible signs of improvement. His once pale skin started to gain a bit more color, and his eyes, previously dull and exhausted, showed a hint of the brightness that Sofia and Miguel knew so well. One afternoon, while he played with a stuffed bear in his bed, Rafael looked up at Sofia with a light smile and asked, "Mommy, when are we going home?" Sofia swallowed hard, feeling tears form in her eyes. She knew they were still far from a definitive discharge, but seeing that hopeful look, she couldn't contain her emotions. "Soon, my love. Soon we'll go home, and you'll have your room, your toys, everything back," she replied, holding his little hand. Miguel came closer, gently stroking Rafael's head, and together, they spent that day as if they were a normal family, even within the walls of a hospital room. It was a simple moment, but for Sofia and Miguel, it felt like a miracle. However, deep down, they both knew the battle wasn't over. The treatment was experimental, and there were still many stages ahead, along with the tests that needed to confirm the medication's effectiveness. But as long as their son was there, smiling, Sofia and Miguel allowed themselves to dream of a life beyond the hospital walls. A few weeks later, Dr. Anderson called them in for another conversation, this time with a more serious expression. "We have good news," he began, handing them some recent test results. "The response to the treatment has been impressive. Rafael is in remission." The word remission echoed in Sofia and Miguel's minds. It was the word they had been waiting for from the beginning, the sign that Rafael's illness was, finally, under control. Sofia covered her face with her hands, crying silently as Miguel hugged her, equally moved. Dr. Anderson smiled, respecting that intimate moment, which represented the victory of an exhausting and painful struggle. Rafael will still need close medical monitoring, and the treatment will need to continue to ensure the remission is lasting. But yes, he'll be able to go home in a few weeks, the doctor added. Emotion filled them. After months of living under the weight of uncertainty, Sofia and Miguel could finally envision a future alongside their son. The news quickly spread among friends, family, and all those who had supported the campaign. It was as if a wave of hope had formed around them, bringing light to the end of a tunnel that had long seemed endless. Finally, the day of discharge arrived. Rafael, still fragile but with a wide smile on his face, left the hospital with his parents by his side. It was a victory they had been waiting for what felt like an eternity. People who had followed Rafael's story gathered outside, applauding as he, confused but happy, looked at everyone around him. Sofia and Miguel took him home, where everything was exactly as they had left it before the long hospital stay. Rafael's little room had been decorated by friends and family, who left welcome notes and toys as a quiet celebration for his return. That night, after putting Rafael to sleep in his own bed, Sofia and Miguel sat side by side in the hallway outside his room, watching their son sleep. For the first time, they felt peace surround them once again, a peace they had lost when they first heard the word cancer. "Miguel," Sofia whispered, with an emotional smile. "He's here, and he's okay. It feels like a dream." Miguel held her hand, equally moved. "I know, Sofia. We went through the worst together. "And we'll keep going together, always," he replied, looking at their son with tearful eyes. That night, Sofia and Miguel slept peacefully for the first time in months. The sound of machines was replaced by the comforting silence of home, and though the fear would never completely disappear, it lay dormant, like a distant shadow. But they both knew that, while the battle had been won, Rafael's journey to recovery was only just beginning. The first few months after Rafael's discharge brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Remission was a victory, but Sofia and Miguel lived with the caution of those who knew the weight of a possible relapse. Rafael would need regular checkups, frequent appointments, and constant care to ensure the illness didn't return. Even so, each morning they saw him wake up at home, healthy and eager to play. They felt increasingly grateful and hopeful. Slowly, Rafael regained his energy, as if trying to make up for lost time. He laughed, ran, and filled the house with the joy that had seemed absent for so long. One day, Sofia watched him play in the yard with Miguel, who was trying to teach his son how to fly a kite. Rafael laughed every time the wind lifted the kite a bit higher, and Miguel laughed along with him, showing him how to hold the line steady and not give up, even when the kite threatened to fall. Sofia's heart warmed at this simple yet extraordinary scene. Moments that had once felt ordinary now held profound and unique importance. Their routine was also filled with medical appointments. With each checkup, that silent fear returned. The fear of hearing bad news, of finding out something was wrong. But little by little, the results came back positive, and with each favorable report, Sofia and Miguel's smiles grew a bit more relaxed. Dr. Anderson closely monitored Rafael's progress, and with each visit, he congratulated the couple for the strength and dedication they'd shown. During one of these visits, while Rafael played in the waiting room, Dr. Anderson called them in for a conversation. "Sofia, Miguel, I believe you already know this, but it's always good to reaffirm it," he began with a warm smile. "Rafael is stable. His tests are clear, and he's developing very well. What happened here is truly a miracle." Sofia gripped Miguel's hand tightly, feeling a deep sense of relief. They knew they would need to remain vigilant, but that moment was a confirmation that every struggle, every sacrifice, every sleepless night had been worth it. Miguel leaned forward and, for the first time, allowed tears to flow freely without the weight of despair that once accompanied them. They were tears of relief, joy, and gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for everything. I know you went beyond what most would do. You gave us not only treatment, but a chance to dream of our son's future again," he said, his voice choked. Dr. Anderson nodded, visibly moved as well. "You're an inspiration to me and to all of us. Rafael is living proof that the strength of a family is something extraordinary." The couple left the doctor's office with light smiles, feeling as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted after so many months of anguish. Seeing Rafael playing and laughing with other boys in the reception area, Sofia and Miguel felt such immense gratitude that they hugged right there, sharing a moment of victory in silence. The months turned into years, and Rafael grew healthy, strong, and full of life. For Miguel and Sofia, the shadow of cancer would never completely disappear, but with time, they learned to live with it, turning it into a memory of resilience and unity. One sunny afternoon, years later, when Rafael was already a strong, healthy boy full of dreams, Miguel called him over for a talk. "Son, do you know how special you are?" he asked, holding Rafael's shoulder and looking into his eyes, which sparkled with the same determination his father had always had. Rafael, now with the vivacity and innocence of a healthy child, smiled. "I know, Daddy. You and Mommy always say I'm your miracle, right?" Miguel smiled and nodded. "Yes, Rafael. You are our miracle. And you've taught us much more than you realize. You taught us to fight, to never give up, and that love is the most powerful thing there is." Sofia, watching the conversation from a distance, approached and placed her hand over Miguel's, completing the circle around Rafael. "One day, you'll understand just how strong you were, Rafael. "And we'll always be here to remind you that you're capable of anything," she said, emotionally, as she hugged him. They stayed there, embraced under the setting sun, grateful for life and the gift they had received. That painful chapter had become a scar, but now it was a mark of victory, proof that love and resilience can truly move mountains and heal even the deepest wounds. And as they watched Rafael run and play, Miguel and Sofia felt that they had conquered fate.